to say, many of you who are members here, you know that we at Mountain View, we believe that we should have an intelligent faith, that while our faith may be subjective, it's based upon objective truth. And we've hammered that over the years concerning the resurrection and the prophecy of the Bible. And so this to me is kind of the crescendo of having a man such as Dr. Licona being with us to kind of affirm everything that we've been saying for many, many years here. Mike has a PhD in the New Testament. He is upcoming, he's been referred to as an upcoming and becoming one of the foremost apologists in our country. I want you to know, as I've interacted with him, he, in spite of his accolades, he is a very humble man and a godly man, and I'm so just delighted to have him. He knows my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, well, and to have that commonality, it's been a blessing. But let me just say before we invite him up, two things. Number one, you may have questions about what he said this morning, today, and next Sunday morning, the first hour. He'll be speaking on the 5 objections to the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, and then he'll be speaking on the resurrection. His book on the resurrection is becoming an incredible book, recognized by all scholars. He has an approach to proving the resurrection that is very new in many circles in the body of Christ. And so I am so thoroughly looking forward to next week. Now, going back to what I said, you probably have questions. Well, we're going to have a luncheon next Sunday after the service, inviting all of you. And at the luncheon, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask Dr. Licona any question you might have. And so we want to invite you back, and there's a sign-up list at the Welcome Center for those who would like to bring something next Sunday. You don't have to bring anything. We just want you to come and enjoy the fellowship next Sunday. But again, we are honored and privileged to have and invite to our pulpit today Dr. Mike Licona. Would you welcome him with me?
Thanks, Pastor. Appreciate it. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. What he didn't say is they are having lobster and crab cakes and filet mignon at that luncheon next week. Isn't that right? Yeah, we wish. I'm going to be talking about doubt, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart because despite the fact that I've spent years looking at evidence for Christianity, for God's existence, looking at the different worldviews, during that time I've experienced a number of bouts with doubt. And I know that some of you out here are like me in the sense that you've experienced doubt during your Christian walk. So what are we to think about that? Now, some people don't experience doubt. My dad never experienced doubt. And in fact, he got mad at me because I did experience doubt. Well, I didn't raise you that way, you know? I'm going to be talking about doubt. So let's just dive right into this, and let's see if this works now, right? It didn't this morning, so let's see. Yeah, okay. So there are 2 kinds of doubt. There's intellectual doubt, when you're unaware of evidence, that there is evidence for Christianity. There are a number of people who have no idea that there's evidence supporting Christianity. I had someone email me just this week saying that they were thanking me. They were unaware. They didn't have a clue that there was anything supporting the truth of Christianity. They just thought you had to believe by faith, pure faith. There was no supporting data. And they were thankful for some of the work that I've done, as well as the work of Gary Habermas. And then, nope, there's that demon involved again. There we go. Was that me or you? Yeah, it was him. All right. So there's also emotional doubt. And this is by far the most common kind of doubt. Now, a lot of times it masquerades as intellectual doubt. And there is certainly intellectual doubt out there, lots of it. But emotional doubt, especially among Christians, is very prominent, okay? So let's talk about emotional doubt. There are a number of reasons, like one is peer pressure. I've been to Israel twice, and during the Sabbath coming up on a Friday, I've been in old city of Jerusalem, and there's this marketplace there, and everybody's just so excited. There is this anticipation, much like we have on Christmas Eve here, and everybody's just happy, jovial, and they are looking forward to the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is big in Jerusalem, not so much in other places of Israel like Tel Aviv, but in Jerusalem. It's a very religious city of pious Jews. And so you get caught up in this, and you can see everybody's really just excited. And if you're an atheist in Jerusalem on the Sabbath, you know you're in a minority and you feel out of place. And as a Christian, I'm over there and I'm experiencing this, and it's like, wow, if I weren't a Christian and I lived here, I'd be a Jew. Because you just get caught up in it. The peer pressure from the culture is very strong. And then you come over here to the United States, and it's the exact opposite. You watch the television, you watch the news, you go to the universities, and the peer pressure is in exactly the opposite direction. It's to give up faith in God, to believe that there's any kind of a supernatural realm of reality. It's to give it up. And if you believe in the supernatural, if you are a Christian and you embrace the Christian ethic, the biblical ethic, well then, you feel definitely out of place. So that kind of peer pressure, you get thinking about it, and we can understand why a lot of our youth today, our high schoolers and college age kids, they're experiencing this. And they're wondering, am I wrong? Are all these people wrong, or am I wrong? I remember I did a debate against an atheist historian at Washburn University back in 2010 or 2009. And this girl came up to me afterward, and she said, when I came to Washburn, I was a Christian, but given all of the peer pressure and all the negativity toward Christianity and Christians from my professors and fellow students, I gave up my faith in my freshman year. She was in her second semester junior now, and she said, I had no idea that there was this evidence for the resurrection of Jesus that you shared tonight, and I wanted to let you know that I'm coming back to the Christian faith, and I'm really looking forward to studying the Bible again and getting involved in a college campus ministry. So it was that peer pressure of atheism and anti-Christian thoughts at Washburn University that led her to jettison her faith during her freshman year. Peer pressure is very strong. And then there's the hypocrisy of some Christian leaders. Let's face it, it's there. Years ago, you heard about many young boys, altar boys, being molested by Catholic priests. And then even more recently, we hear about, like 2 years ago, you heard about Ravi Zacharias, a prominent figure out there. And all of a sudden you find shortly after his death that some of these accusations that had occurred during his life but were egregiously passed up and ignored by the board of directors, that they were true, that Ravi had actually raped women and had involved in massage parlors where he engaged and forced these women to do things. And I mean, the guy was just a charlatan. And so people would look at that and say, wow, well, if Christian leaders are like this, is it true? And it turns people off. We can understand why it would. And then you have abusive fathers sometimes. Sometimes an abusive father can turn a child off. It doesn't matter if that abusive father was Christian or not. The child, when they hear about a loving heavenly father, it becomes really, really difficult for them to conceive of a loving heavenly father because they had no concept of a loving father here on earth. Their experience of a father was a very negative one. And so that can cause emotional doubt. And then we have disappointment with God. Now, this can, I remember back in 1997, I was going through what probably one of the strongest periods of doubts I've ever experienced. My father-in-law was dying of cancer in Nebraska. My wife went out there, took our 2 kids to go be with him the last few months of his life. We were living in Virginia Beach at the time. I was involved in financial or estate planning with senior citizens. And I was going through, I was just commission-based at the time, the way I earned a living then. And we were just really, I was going through this period where nobody was doing anything. And I felt like I was being a good technician. I was working up these plans for these wealthy people on how they could just save millions of dollars in estate taxes and pass things along. But for some reason, they just weren't going with the plans that I was presenting. And so I wasn't making any money. And we were just getting in the hole, and things were just getting really bad. And of course, those of you who are married here, you know that when you have financial struggles in the family, that you end up fighting a lot with your spouse, right? Because of the pressure involved. And so she's out in Nebraska, I'm in Virginia Beach, we'll talk on the phone, we're getting in arguments, and I'm praying and I'm saying, God, these are really good plans I'm doing for these people, and they're not doing it. I don't know why, but it seems like the more I'm praying, the worse things are getting. And it's like, I thought, if God doesn't exist, well, this is entirely consistent. If God doesn't exist, of course I wouldn't be getting my prayers answered, because there's no God to answer those prayers, and that made sense to me. And I thought, but I've looked at the evidence for God's existence. I've really studied the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. It just seems that the evidence points really strongly in that direction. So I'm faced with this Job moment, kind of, Well, do I stay in the faith, or do I jettison and move away? And I thought, I'm going to stay, because I believe it's true. I believe it's true, and I don't know why God is allowing this in my life. The disappointment with God led to doubts. All right, let's go to the next slide. A lot of times it's the way we're wired, too. I can say that I'm wired to doubt. I hate that, but I'm just wired. We all have idiosyncrasies, right? Some of us have more than others. But one of my idiosyncrasies is that I just second guess everything. My wife doesn't even like to go shopping with me, because sometimes I'm serious. Sometimes it just takes a long time to make a decision on just little things. I remember my freshman year in college, I came home for Thanksgiving break, and my parents said, "What would you like for Christmas?" I said, "Well, how about a new watch?" And we lived in Baltimore, and my dad said, "Well, I'll tell you what, after Thanksgiving, like the day after Thanksgiving, I'll take you down to this big jewelry store in Baltimore City, and they'll have a nice selection there." I mean, malls weren't, I don't even know if malls were around at that time in Baltimore, maybe, but he knew of this jewelry store in downtown Baltimore City. And so we went down there, this wall just filled with watches, and I'm thinking, man, this is wonderful. Well, I got it down to 2 watches, and I just could not decide. And it probably took me a good 15 minutes just to decide between those 2 watches. And it's like, and then later on you think, well, should I have gotten the other one? You know, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Well, let's see. So, it's like, do you have problems making a decision? Well, yes and no. So, you have these, you double think everything, second guess everything. When I, choosing a wife was that way for me too. It's like I wanted to when I went to college, I started to ask married couples, what do I need to look for in a spouse? What's not on my radar that should be? What is on my radar that really doesn't matter? Let me learn from your mistake, And so I probably interviewed 36 couples, and I got all of their answers together, and by the time I finished college, I was able to gather all of the stuff and catalog them into what I called the 5 C's of complete compatibility. This marriage brought to you by the letter C, right? And then I'd ask a girl out on a date when I'm in grad school, and then after our date, I'd come back to my apartment and I'd start a file on her. And then I would write down how I assessed that we lined up with those 5 C's. And then I'd think, well, I'm not sure about this category. Yeah, she's pretty, so the chemistry is there. But what about this? I'm not sure about this. And maybe I need to ask her these questions on the next date. And after, there's always compensating factors, Like if she's a little crazy, well, if she's really pretty, that can compensate for being, So it's like, at the end you think, well, yeah, if she's too deficient in one of these areas, then it's like, well, I'm going to stop this relationship. I'm not going to pursue it any further. I might be developing emotions, attachment to her, but I don't think this would work as a marriage, so I just forced myself to stop pursuing the relationship. And then I met Debbie. I started my wife, and I start this file, and we dated for 18 months, and we got married. But I'll tell you, despite the fact that we lined up in all these things as I wanted us to, I doubted all the way up to the altar. And 20 years into our marriage, it's like, well, what? It's not her, it's me. It's all this stuff. It just the second guessing. Well, if I'm going to second guess my watch and my wife, why wouldn't I second guess my worldview? If I bought the wrong watch, I could get a different one. If I married the wrong woman, well, that's going to make us miserable for a while. But if I choose the wrong worldview, it could cost me eternity. And that's the kind of stuff that kept me up at night. So it's not necessarily always the intellectual stuff. And the way I'll put it sometimes is, sometimes I'll speak on a pretty large stage in front of some a lot of people. And when you're on a large stage, the media people will say, okay, you'll notice that over here and there's some tape that glows in the dark. And you don't want to go on the other side of that tape. Maybe there's 40 feet this way, 40 feet this way, and 10 feet this way. And the reason you want to stay within that tape is because that's where the lighting is, right? If you go outside, the lights won't shine on you. Well, you can keep within that area very easily, very easily. I could walk backward, I could close my eyes and walk backward, I could do cartwheels. I'm not going to get outside of that area. But if someone took a plank that was 10 feet wide and suspended it between two skyscrapers 500 feet above the ground and then said, walk across that and I'll give you $10,000. Well, why not? Well, what if I fall? Yeah, but you're not going to fall. You can stay within that space. That's 10 feet you got to work with. I know, but what if I fall? But you're not. You can do it. I know. But if I do, I die in a nasty way. It has nothing to do with whether I could do it. It's like the consequences are so bad, so horrible falling that I don't even want to try. And it's like what would cause me intellectual doubt is I think about, what if I'm wrong when it comes to my worldview? But Mike, you've looked at the evidence. I know, but what if I'm wrong? What if Islam is correct? But Mike, you've looked at the evidence for Islam. I know, but if I'm wrong in something else, what if God just doesn't like me? That's emotional doubt. It has nothing to do with intellectual doubt. So if you have found yourself at times struggling with emotional doubt, I want to give you 4 key actions to how to survive it. 4 key actions to surviving emotional doubt. Number 1, recognize that doubting is normal. Let's look at a few examples from our current time. C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was an atheist who converted to Christianity after a while. His number 1 argument against God's existence was the problem of evil, and he came to recognize that if God does not exist, there's no objective more evil out there. It's all subjective, and so his argument against God's existence actually proved it. We can get into that another time if you like. But here's what they asked, or C.S. Lewis, he ended up writing this book, Mere Christianity, that was largely based on some interviews he did with the BBC. And in his book, here's what he writes. Faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods. For moods will change, whatever view your reason takes. I know that by experience. Now that I am a Christian, I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. But When I was an atheist, I had moods in which Christianity looked terribly probable. Moods. It's an emotional thing. Let's look at Antony Flew. Antony Flew was one of the most influential atheist philosophers in the 20th century. He was a close friend. He debated my mentor, Gary Habermas, 3 times they debated. And they became friends. And one time, Gary tells me one time he and Antony Flew were driving along in a car, and Gary said to him, "Tony, do you ever doubt your atheism?" He said, "Gary, I doubt my atheism every day." So even atheists, thinking atheist doubt. Thinking Christians can doubt. People of any worldview can doubt. Why? Because the consequences of whether it's true or false, what you believe in, can be so dire. It's the way you're wired. Okay. Let's go to the Bible. Do we have doubters in the Bible? Yes. Take, for example, Abraham. So Abraham, God comes to him and he says, "Abraham, I'm going to make a great nation out of you." And then Abraham, he's around 100 years old and he still doesn't have a child. It's like, well, this isn't happening. My wife's 90. It ain't happening. And so finally, he has the son. And we know about that with Isaac and Ishmael. So anyway, before they have the son, some famine happens in the land, and he has to go down to a different land. And now we're at Genesis 12. And Genesis 12 says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'I'm going to give this land to your offspring.' And Abram built an altar there to commemorate the Lord's visit. After that, Abram traveled southward. At that time, there was a severe famine in the land, so Abraham went down to Egypt to wait it out. As he was approaching the borders of Egypt, Abram said to Sarai, 'You're a very beautiful woman.'" Guys, I give you points, score points with your wives if you say that. "When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him, then we can have her.' But if you say, 'You're my sister,'" which is okay, probably true if you live in West Virginia, "but if you say, 'You're my sister,' then the Egyptians will treat me well because of their interest in you, and they will spare my life." And sure enough, when they arrived in Egypt, everyone spoke of her beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to the king, the Pharaoh, and she was taken into his harem. But the Lord sent a terrible plague upon Pharaoh's household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called for Abram and accused him sharply. "What is this you've done to me?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Here is your wife, take her and be gone." Pharaoh then sent them out of the country under armed escort, Abram and his wife, with all their household and belongings. So Abram did not trust the Lord. When it came down to it, and he was being tried, put to the test, Abram failed. He failed because he didn't trust God, that God was going to make a nation out of him, and he still didn't have a son. So he wasn't trusting the Lord. But the Lord came through for him, right? He made sure that he and his wife Sarah were still alive, and so the promise could happen. So, of course, the next time Abram was faced with a decision because the promise that God had given him was put to the test, and it didn't look like it was going to come, Abram still trusted God and believed in him, right? No! Chapter 20. Now Abram moved south to the Negev. Abram told people there that his wife Sarah was a sister. So King Abimelech sent for her and had her brought to him at his palace. But one night God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, "You're a dead man." How'd you like God saying that to you? You're a dead man. "For that woman you took is married." But Abimelech had not slept with her yet, so he said, "Lord, will you kill an innocent man? Abraham told me she's my sister," and she herself said, "Yes, he's my brother. I acted in complete innocence." "Yes, I know you are innocent," God replied. "That is why I kept you from sinning against me. I did not let you touch her. Now return her to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he's a prophet. Then you will live. But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and your entire household will die." Abimelech got up early the next morning. I'm sure it was very early, and hastily called a meeting of all his servants. When he told them what had happened, great fear swept through the crowd. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. What is this you've done to us? He demanded. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and servants, both men and women, and gave them to Abraham, and he returned his wife Sarah to him. So what do we have with Abraham? You have a guy that God appears to him, he gives him a promise, and Abraham doubts. He doubts. But he heard God's voice, he acted in faith on occasions, he doubted God on occasions, but as we read on in Genesis, he grew to have great faith. And when we come to Hebrews chapter 11, the Faith Hall of Fame, if there's anyone who's an MVP in the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews 11, it's Abraham, the one who had doubted. Let's look at another example, John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist is Jesus' wingman here, kind of, right? He's out pointing the world to Jesus. And there comes a time when John the Baptist criticizes Herod because he was married to his brother's wife, which was unlawful. And because of his criticizing of Herod, Herod arrests and imprisons John the Baptist. So John is in prison, he's in a dungeon, things aren't good, and now we can see that John is starting to doubt because his circumstances are just horrible. And so here's what you got. In Matthew 11, verses 2 and 11, 2 through 11, you have two of John's disciples come to Jesus because John sends them. And they say, John wants to know, are you the Messiah or are we to expect someone else? Now think about this. Yeah, John the Baptist, who was there, he baptized Jesus. He hears the voice from heaven. He sees the Holy Spirit descend on Jesus. And now he is saying, are you the Messiah or are we to expect someone else? Now, he's doubting, of course. It's like I was when I'm thinking I'm really struggling financially. And God, the more I'm praying, you're just not coming through for me. And it's like, where are you? And here's John the Baptist. He had devoted his life to the Lord, and now he's sitting in a dungeon in uncomfortable conditions. Life is not going well for him. And he's doubting, God, where are you? Jesus, are you the Messiah, or are we to expect someone else? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because this is in front of the crowd. How does Jesus respond to John the Baptist, who's doubting? Kind of an embarrassing moment for Jesus. So look at what Jesus says. He says, go back to John and tell him about what you have heard and seen. So he's now done some things that they have seen. What are those? The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. And tell him, God blesses those who are not offended by me. When John's disciples had gone, Jesus began talking about him to the crowd. Who is this man in the wilderness that you went out to see? Did you find him weak as a reed moved back and forth by the wind? He knew John was doubting. I assure you, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. So he provided evidence to those disciples to go back and tell John, all right, you've seen the blind people, the blind can see, the deaf hear, the dead are raised. And so he's given them evidence, and then he encourages them. Blessed are those who are not offended on account of me. He's encouraging John. And now, when they leave, he turns to the crowd and compliments John. Knowing he is doubting, he says, no greater man has been born of woman than John the Baptist. Whoa! Does God get mad at me when I doubt? No. He understands that we are frail humans, emotional humans, that things happen in our lives that will sometimes cause us to question whether we are connected to the right worldview. He understands that. He has provided evidence. He does encourage us. And yet with John, he still compliments him. That's pretty amazing. And if Jesus can compliment John the Baptist in the midst of his doubts, that gives us something that Jesus' response to John the Baptist gives us a model of how we can respond to doubters. So even if you've never experienced doubt, let Jesus be your model on how to respond to someone who's doubting. It's nothing to just get on them for because they're doubting. Doubting is normal. Okay. Action number 2. Recognize there is good evidence for the truth of Christianity. Now, I'm going to whip through some of this because I don't have a whole lot of time, okay? But let me just give you some evidence for Christianity. Number 1, we have evidence for a first cause. Okay, so there are a lot of, all of us were caused, all right? We had causes. What were those causes? Our parents. And they had causes, their parents. And back, all the way to the first humans. And then, well, how did that happen? Then you got the universe. Well, how, we couldn't have life without the universe. Well, how did the earth get here? How did the universe get here? Well, many think it was because it seems like it was the Big Bang. And with the Big Bang, you have the universe coming into existence. But how did that happen? Well, what astronomers, astrophysicists, cosmologists believe is that before there was the Big Bang, there was nothing at all. So it's not like you could have been in the universe, this vacuum of space where they're just floating around where there's nothing. No, space and time were created with the Big Bang so that before the Big Bang occurred, nothing at all existed. It's kind of like, think about your car out in a lot right now. It is parked in a parking space. That space was empty before you came. But imagine there's no space. There's no parking space. Well, then there's no place to put your car. Well, it's the same thing with the universe. There was not only no matter, there was no space either. And since there's no space, there's no time that could elapse how long that space had been there. There was literally nothing at all. This is what most cosmologists believe. So, since there was nothing, what exploded? How do you get something from nothing? Aristotle once said, nothing is what rocks dream about. You can't get something from nothing, at least by natural causes. God creates out of nothing. So the universe, we know, and it's unanimous amongst astrophysicists now, the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. So what does that mean? Well, there's only 3 options with the universe having a beginning. Number 1, the universe caused itself. Well, how do you bring yourself into existence without existing? So that is self-refuting. You can't do that. Second possibility is the universe was uncaused. It just pops into existence, uncaused, out of nothing. That's irrational. The third is that the universe was caused, brought into being. And you can't have this infinite number of causes like domino effects. Okay, something had to put that original domino into place. So that leaves, you have to come back to a first cause, which logically speaking, it must be uncaused and eternal. This is what we call God. Next argument is the design argument, the Kalam cosmological argument. This has been around a while. I'm sorry. No, this is still the first cause. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe was caused, and the cause must be eternal. It has to have been. So, all right, go to there we go. Evidence for a designer. The universe seems to show evidence that it's the product of that it was designed. Arno Penzias was one of the 2 Bell Lab scientists who discovered a blanket of radiation in the center of our universe, which suggested that a long time ago the universe was very dense and it was very hot, as evidenced by an explosion. And this confirmed the Big Bang. Some were saying, well, see, we know God didn't exist because it exploded with the Big Bang. But then, as they started to learn more things as they studied the universe, they saw, whoa, our universe really does seem to be, as a result of this, to be the product of design. It's things like, if the universe had been expanding any faster than it is, then galaxies could not have formed, and of course we couldn't have life. The star-planet relationships. If it were expanding any slower, then the gravitational pull would have caused it to stop expanding, and then it would have collapsed back on itself, and this would have occurred prior to the formation of stars. So the universe is going at exactly the rate it would need to be expanding in order for life to exist. That's just one factor. There are so many different factors out there, more than 100, that most of them are balanced on a knife's edge, that if they just changed one way or the other, you could not have life. So Arno Penzias, one of the guys, again, who discovered the Big Bang, here's what he writes. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. All right, then you have, aside from that, you have Francis Crick. Now, Francis Crick was one of the two scientists who discovered DNA. He was an agnostic bordering on atheism. And Crick said that the evidence or the complexity of the simplest part of life, DNA, it was already so extremely complex that there's no way that it could have evolved on Earth. We're not talking about just general Darwinian evolution. We're talking about just getting the simple DNA. All right? He's saying it is so complex already, there's no way it could have evolved during even a 4.5 billion year old Earth. In fact, here's what he says. An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to be satisfied to get it going. Well, how unlikely? Well, let's look at some numbers here. So the number of seconds that have elapsed since Julius Caesar was assassinated is 10 to the 11th power. That is a 1 followed by 11 zeros. Actually, it's a little less than that. It's 65,216,448,000 seconds. That's a lot of seconds. Now, suppose I asked you, I said, I want you to choose any of those seconds. Don't tell anybody, write it down. And she writes down, well, let's see, how about 1:13 in the afternoon and 42 seconds in the year, how about 786? And you write that on a paper. And then we bring the pastor in and say, okay, pastor, you have one chance to guess that second that she chose. What would your chances be? One chance in 65 billion. You're not going to put money on that. You know what I mean? All right, that's a 1. That's less than a 1 followed by 11 zeros. Now let's look at something else. The number of atoms estimated to exist in the universe is 10 to the 82nd power. Now keep in mind, every time you add a 0, you multiply that number tenfold. So if you have a 10, you add 1 0, it's 100, 10 times 10. If you add one more 0, it's 1,000, 10 times the amount of 100. So, each 0 you add is a huge difference. Huge difference. The difference between 10 to the 82nd power and 10 to the 83rd power is huge. Now, this is what 10 to the 82nd power looks like. You can see there are a lot of zeros there. 82 zeros. 1 followed by 82 zeros. Now, if I were to say, mark one atom in the universe and you have one chance to select that atom, blindfolded. Ain't going to happen. All right, now let's look at the real number. This is what Francis Crick, the agnostic scientist who discovered DNA, he says it is so unlikely for life, DNA, to evolve by chance. Here it is. One chance in 10 to the 2 billionth power. Now, you can't even comprehend this. If I thought about writing out, typing out all the zeros, 2 billion zeros, and then I thought, I better see how long this would take. So if I did 2 zeros per second, it would take me 32 years. That's just to type out the number. But like if I could write the number 1,000 pretty quickly, couldn't I? Take me 2 seconds to write 1,000. But how long would it take me to draw 2,000 dots? A lot longer, wouldn't it? it would take me 32 years to write the number 10 to the 2 billionth power, 1 followed by 2 billion zeros. I don't even know how long it would take for me to draw 10 to the 2 billion zeros and dots. That's the improbability of life evolving by chance on Earth. So, how do we account for life then by natural causes? Well, Crick gets together and he has this thing called directed panspermia. Directed panspermia is that there was a civilization on a distant planet somewhere, and they were facing extinction, and so they wanted to build a spaceship to come to, somehow they knew about the Earth. But then they recognized that it would just take too long, they couldn't make the trip, and so what they did was they put bacteria on the spaceship, sent it to the Earth, it landed on the Earth, let the bacteria out, and that is how we got life. And they think we have faith. Okay? So, if the evidence points to a designer of the universe, why not think a designer? It's like, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, well, it must be a turtle in disguise. No, it sounds like that the universe and life itself is the product of a designer. Okay, next slide. Then there's the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I'm not going to get into this because we're going to talk about this next week. In fact, I've written a book that's like over 700 pages on the topic. I'm not going to get into all that with you. I'm going to break it down and give you an argument for the resurrection next week that is so simple that even a Southern Baptist can understand. Okay. I worked for the Southern Baptist Convention. I did for about 6 or 7 years. And I walked in there and I thought, my view of Southern Baptists was they were backward anti-intellectuals. And after being with them 6 or 7 years, I recognized I was only 70% correct. But honestly, there's some great Southern Baptists out there, so I like to just joke about them, though. All right, so that's some of the evidence. All right, let's go to the third key action. So first key action is to recognize that doubting is normal. Second key action, recognize there's good evidence for Christianity. Third key action, recognize that absolute certainty is an unreasonable expectation. It's an unreasonable expectation. How do you know that you are as old as you think you are? Can you be certain of that? Well, yeah, I got a birth certificate. Do clerical errors ever occur? Well, my parents told me, is human memory always correct? Can you be 100% certain that you are as old as you've been told? 100%? Probably not. I've talked to a couple of these guys before the first service this morning, the Sunday school service. They drove trains. There's one of them. Drove trains for a living. My grandfather drove trains. I love trains. I love them. I was at the B&O Railroad Museum back in 2012 with my mom and in Baltimore where I grew up. And I said to the manager, I said, hey, what's the possibility of me getting a piece of rail that B&O trains actually ran over? And she said, we could arrange that. So $125 later, in a few weeks, I received this via UPS, this piece of rail. It's in my office today. And then a day later, I get this envelope. It's like, okay, stamped by the U.S. Post Office, a government agency. Pretty credible. Open it up. It's this letter, and it's there on the letterhead of the B&O Railroad Museum, and you got the manager writing out, and she's saying, yep, tell me a little bit of a history of this rail, and it was laid in the 1920s, and it was there along the very first line of commercial passenger train in the United States. And tells me a little bit more about the rail. I said, that's pretty cool. How certain can I be that rail is what that letter says? Well, how do I know that the manager wasn't mistaken? Well, maybe she was telling the truth as she believed it, but maybe she didn't know the truth about that rail. Maybe she told the welder who went out to cut that little piece of rail, and he went to the wrong track and got it. How do I know? Can I be 100%? No, I can't. And yet, got really good evidence for it. We don't look for 100% evidence. we look for reasonable certainty. What's the most probable explanation? And that's all we can do with anything in life. Hey, some of you went to the altar at your wedding day and you were 100% certain that you were marrying the right person. And now you know you were wrong. You had 100% certainty, but you weren't justified in being 100% certain. I'm talking about 100% justifiable certainty. We don't have that when you look at F, but no worldview has that, because none of us can get into a time machine, return to the past, and verify our conclusions. So we should not expect that. Number 4, and finally, recognize that faith is more than a feeling or absence of doubt. It's a commitment. This comes up like, imagine you're a college student and you start dating someone and you really like this person and this person wants to have sex with you. And you think, oh man, I'd really like to do that. But my Christian worldview, I know the Lord would not want me to do that until I'm married. And you're thinking about this. If you're doubting Christianity, you say, okay, I know if Christianity is true that it'd be wrong for me to do that. But maybe Christianity isn't true after all, and I can go ahead and do this. And you're having these doubts. Well, guess what? Faith is you decide that you're going to live at that point. When you're experiencing doubt, you decide that you're going to live in a manner as though it's true. You believe it's true, but you have some doubts. You live as though it's true. That's faith. As James said, show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith by my works. It's hanging in there. It's like what Peter did. You know, he didn't have a perfect faith. He saw Jesus walking on water and he said, Lord, if it's you, call me out. Come on, Peter. So he starts walking. He's got some faith. He's believing, but he has some doubts and he begins to sink. All right? So you can still have belief and faith at the same time. But faith, true faith, is when you continue to act as though it's true. You believe it's true, but you're acting as though it's true, even in the midst of your doubt. All right, let's summarize. You want to survive your emotional doubt? Recognize that doubting is normal. Recognize that good evidence for the truth of Christianity exists. Recognize that absolute certainty is an unreasonable expectation. And finally, recognize that faith is more than a feeling or absence of doubt. It's a commitment. And if you keep these things in mind, you'll find that you can maintain a healthy faith in spite of occasional emotional doubt. If you want more information, we've got some on our YouTube channel. Just type in my name on YouTube. We have over 500 videos on there, coming up on 600 videos. We got some on doubt. You just type in my name or go to youtube.com/Mike Licona Official, and my channel will come up. Then it kind of looks like this. You come to it and you go to that search bar, or let's search the magnifying glass, and you type in doubt. And you'll have several videos come up where I address doubt. One of them, go ahead. One of them, my wife and I did a few years ago when Marty Sampson, one of the main worship leaders, came out and said that he had given up his Christian faith. And so Debbie and I decided, hey, we're going to talk about the doubts that I have experienced that time and why some of the responses of some in the Christian leaders, the responses of it to Marty losing his faith, why that they were just I think they were wrong-headed responses. They just weren't compassionate. They just did not understand this about doubt. And so we talked about it, and boom, all of a sudden we were getting all these views on that, on doubt. It's cool too. There's this one guy who's got this child, and he was in Texas, and he said, hey, love what you're doing. He started sending us $600 a month for our ministry. I was like, man, that's cool. Let's do another one. So we got some stuff on doubt, and I hope that's been helpful. And finally, we do have a website, risenjesus.com. We've got some articles and some things on there that you could find helpful. So I hope that is helpful to you. And Pastor, as we wrap up here, did you want to come up? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So let me close this in prayer, and thanks for your patience with me today, and I'll look forward to being with you all again next week. Father, thank you that we have the example of Jesus on how he treated John the Baptist when he was doubting. Thank you that you are mindful that we are just dust, and you love us and you're patient with us. And thank you that you have provided in data to show us Christianity is true. We love you, Lord, and thank you. In Christ's name, amen.